part of. And so we left with him, not knowing what lay in front of us. In front of me was a crowd of Pharisees, all of them hypocrites. They knew what I had done, and done it mainly with them. Yet they were here ready to stone me for it. Jesus called out, "Let him who has cast the first stone, let him who is without sin cast the first stone." And there was silence. And one by one they left me behind with him, who called to me to go and find my humanity again. So I went, more alive than ever before. She was more alive than ever before, my daughter. When her father left to find Jesus, he knew he'd never see her again, my poor daughter, not able to make it to womanhood. But Jesus never gave up hope. We left him with her, and after what seemed an eternity, he called for food. "Your daughter is alive and hungry." So we threw our sadness into celebration, and she had been called back to life. I was called back to life. I once was dead, not the death of eternity, worse than that, the death of living. I'm a tax collector. My death was the silence and the hatred of others as I climbed a tree and was invited back into my own home by Jesus for a meal through which I was reborn. A new person now, called a friend of God. I was on my way. We were on our way, 10 of us, unclean with bandaged limbs, dirty rags covering our hands and feet that leprosy was eating away. Everyone avoided us except Jesus. He touched us, befriended us, and called us back into community, clean once more and acceptable. I ran back to Jesus to thank him. It was all I could do. It was all I could do to say yes. Yes to God, to God asking me to be his handmaid, mother of a child who would be the salvation of the world, who harboured hope enough to bring down the oppressor and the tyrant, and to lift up the poor and the hungry. I was called to be the mother of God, and I said yes. I said yes, but it wasn't in some biblical story, it was now. I said yes to God's justice today, God's hope now, God's intent in me to call out the life in me and set it free in the world, to be a follower of the adventures, a follower of dreams, a follower of love. Be a follower of love and join the fishermen and the sinners and the women and the children and the sick and the poor, the needy and the hopeful. Be called to be fully alive in this world. Be called to be the hands and feet of heaven. Called to be all we can be. Called to follow. The story of Jesus coming to the fishermen and calling them to leave their nets and become fishers of men and women is one we all know well. It's very clear that for Andrew, Simon, James and John, the decision to drop their nets and follow Jesus was an easy one. Yet I'm sure it probably wasn't as easy as it seemed. There is a great challenge in accepting an invitation from a homeless, unknown, itinerant teacher who just happened upon them and called them to follow him. It would be hard to see or understand the future that Jesus was offering them, but he said to them, "Don't be afraid, I will make you fishers of men." Have you ever seen yourself in that story? Jesus coming to you, saying to you, "Leave what you're doing now and follow me." And what was your response? I think I'd have a lot of excuses. In today's reading from Isaiah, we heard God tell Isaiah that hearts would be hardened, ears deafened, eyes blinded. People would fail to believe, but despite all of that, there would remain a remnant, a core from which God's faithful would grow. Now that's pretty depressing stuff. But the verses immediately before that are some of my most favourite verses. That in the year King Uzziah died, I saw the Lord high and exalted, seated on the throne. The train of his robes filled the temple. Above him were seraphim, each with 6 wings. With 2 wings they covered their faces, and with 2 wings they covered their feet, and with 2 they were flying. And they were calling one to another, Holy, holy, holy is the Lord Almighty. The whole earth is full of his glory. And at the sound of their voices, the doorstops, the thresholds shook, and the temple was filled with smoke. Woe to me, I said, I am ruined, for I am a man of unclean lips. I live among people of unclean lips, and my eyes still have seen the King, the Lord Almighty. Then one of the seraphim flew to me, and with a live coal in his hand, which he had taken with tongs from the altar, he touched my mouth. See, this has touched your lips, your guilt is taken away, your sins atoned for. Then I heard the voice of the Lord saying, Whom shall I send, and who will go for us? And I said, Here I am, send me. The temple fully opened, and God sitting on the mercy seat, or the seat of grace, with his robes filling that space, angels around him, singing and praising God. And there was Isaiah, seeing all of this, God in his holiest place, seeing the surroundings, feeling unworthy, feeling as though he shouldn't be there. I'm not good enough to be here. Why are you thinking I could possibly do this? Why are you asking me who you should send? But here in these passages we come to see that God, the creator of the universe, the one without equal, will look to his people to go for him. Whom shall I send? Who will go for us? Jesus walks over to the boats beached on the shore and begins to teach those around him. He was teaching in the synagogue, but now he had come out to the outside, to the beach, to the lake, and he tells Simon, head back out to the lake. Despite having fished all night and caught nothing, he goes. Overwhelmed with the catch, he calls his mates, and they too are overwhelmed with the catch. They head back to shore, and Simon, knowing that he's not worthy to be in the presence of this man, like Isaiah, tells him so. Yet Jesus says, don't be afraid. I will make you fishers of men and women. They left their nets and they went with him. Here in this passage we see the same as we saw in Isaiah. Jesus, the Son of God, looking to ordinary people to go for him. Whom will I send? Who will go for us? And again in Paul's letter to the Corinthians we hear the same thing. I, who am the least of the apostles, not fit to be called an apostle because I persecuted the church of God. Here too Paul's confession of unworthiness and accepting blame for what he did to the church, we see that God offers grace and forgiveness, worthiness and wholeness. We see God asking, whom shall I send? Who will go for us? And Isaiah, Simon, Paul all say, here I am, send me. Asking that question, whom shall I send, is important, but the answer is the most important thing. If Mary or Joseph had said no, what if John the Baptist had said no? What if the fishermen had said no because, we've got a life here? Like Isaiah or Paul, they all felt unworthy. Their eyes were blind, their hearts hardened to the voice of God calling them. Maybe God would go on and find another. Maybe Jesus would have found others. The crucial thing was, rather than saying no, and being overwhelmed or made stagnant by their unworthiness, they all said, "Send me." When they were asked, they said, "Send me." I'm a great fan of Mary, mother of Jesus, Mary. You know, there's a few Marys, but this one in particular. And I think about her a lot. And at some stage in Mary's life, Jesus has come to her to say, "That's it, I'm leaving home, I'm going." Now, this is a woman who knew the whole story right from the beginning. She knew her son was the Messiah, but she also knew Jesus. She was his mother. And there must have been times when there was a tug of war between being the handmaid of God and being Jesus' mother. And those of us in this place who are mothers and grandmothers know that there is a powerful relationship between mother and children. And we see that come out with Mary a couple of times, where she goes with her other sons, to drag Jesus out of a place where he was preaching because, he was a bit of an upstart and it was dangerous for him to preach. So she went to get him back. Or when she stood at the Canaan wedding and said, "It's time, do this miracle. Having no wine is an embarrassment to the family. Get on with it." So she had a role of influence and power. But she had to confront a change in that relationship, and we see it in Matthew chapter 12, verses 46 to 50, where Jesus is preaching and his mother and brothers come to take him home. And he says to the crowd, "Who is my mother? Who are my brothers? Those who do my Father's will are my brother, mother, and sister." Mary, at some stage in the life of Jesus, moves from mother to follower, despite what must have been the tug of war between the two roles. Imagine how hard it must have been for Mary to give up the power and influence she had, being Jesus' mother, to become a follower like the others, like us. Today's readings highlight for me the idea that all of us grapple with a sense of unworthiness, a sense of unsuitability, a lack of talent or a lack of desire to accept the invitation to follow Jesus and more fully move into God's will for us and for his people. I know for one that I very often am happy to dance on the edge of God's plan. Sometimes those plans just seem too big for me. I don't see myself as an Isaiah or a Simon or Andrew or a Paul. And I ask the question, just how practical is it for us to be called to leave something we know and move into something we don't? Well, the simple answer is we've all done it before. We've moved from school to work, work to retirement. We've grown from child to adult, single to couple, and sometimes couple to family. These changes have put us on a path of discovery and a journey into the unknown, all part of God's plan for his people. February is a time when I like to take a moment to look forward at what's coming in the new year, but it's also looking back at what's gone before. I think only when we turn back and look at the places from which we've come can we see the faithful hand of God reminding us that he deals with our hardened heart with love. He deals with our blindness with grace, and he deals with our deafened ears with forgiveness. At this stage, we are called from the known into the unknown, each stage planned by God for us so that we can be the people who, when we are asked, "Whom shall I send? Who shall go for us?" we are able to answer like Isaiah did when he said, "Here I am, send me." Or Simon did by dropping his nets, ready to follow. Or Paul, by knowing that it is by God's grace that he works the works he does.